In the news tonight, the Israeli Prime Minister warns against any international rush to recognize a Palestinian government due to be announced under a unity pact between Fatah and Hamas groups. Two Jordanian students from the University of Science and Technology, winners of the Microsoft Imagine Cup Jordan, meet with Her Majesty Queen Rania as they prepare to take part in the Arab Semi-Finals Cup in Qatar. And FIFA is facing calls to rerun the bidding competition for the 2022 World Cup after allegations that the Qatar bid was corrupt. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called on the international community not to recognize a Palestinian unity government, which includes Hamas, a day before Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is expected to announce a unified government. Abbas is expected to announce the cabinet list made up of technocrats and independents from Fatah and Hamas tomorrow. At the start of his weekly cabinet meeting, Netanyahu called on the international community not to embrace the new Palestinian government, saying this will not strengthen peace, but rather terror. Israel suspended peace negotiations with Abbas as soon as he announced a unity deal with Hamas was in the works in late April. It also said it would impose economic sanctions against any joint government. A Palestinian official said Israel has denied requests by 3 Gazans expected to be named as ministers to attend the new government's swearing-in ceremony in the West Bank. Over to Syria, where violence continued in several parts of the country, mainly in Aleppo, where there are reports of continued government aerial attacks on rebel-held areas in the city. 4 civilians and 5 army personnel were killed in the exchange of fire between government forces and rebel fighters in and outside Aleppo. Yesterday, activists and rebels said at least 40 Syrian soldiers were killed when rebels detonated explosives packed beneath an army base in the city. The Islamic Front claimed responsibility for the bombing. Near Daraa, meanwhile, displaced Syrians from the village of Al-Lajat said they are forced to live in the mountains and caves surrounding their town to escape the constant shelling on their hometown. More than 100 families have escaped into the mountains, where they live on a stretch of land, suffering a lack of food and water without access to healthcare or medicine. An estimated 6.5 million Syrians have been displaced within their country, and 2.5 million have crossed the borders since the uprising began. Lebanon has warned Syrian refugees they would lose their refugee status if they cross back into Syria. An Interior Ministry statement said all displaced Syrians and those registered with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees are asked to refrain from entering Syria as of today, under penalty of losing their refugee status in Lebanon. The ministry said it was acting to prevent any friction or mutual provocation between Syrians and their Lebanese host communities. The decision, affecting more than 1 million Syrian refugees living in Lebanon, comes just 2 days before a presidential election in which Syrian officials have urged many to vote at polling stations on the border. Tens of thousands of Syrians cast ballots at their Beirut embassy in an early round of expatriate voting last week, and embassy staff said those who were unable to participate could vote at polling stations just inside Syria on Tuesday. A Libyan warplane under the command of former Army General Khalifa Haftar targeted an Islamist militia base in the eastern city of Benghazi, but instead hit a university building. One jet targeted a historic building which houses a base belonging to the militant group Ansar al-Sharia, but instead the warplane fired 3 rockets at a neighboring university engineering faculty. 2 people were wounded. Kuwaiti Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah began a visit to Iran today, the first by a Kuwaiti Emir since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Emir is heading a delegation to Tehran, including the Foreign Minister and Oil Minister. Iran's ambassador to Kuwait said the Emir's visit comes at a critical time and amid complicated changes in the region, adding that it would start a new chapter of bilateral cooperation. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said he could not take up an invitation to visit Saudi Arabia because the proposed dates clashed with planned nuclear negotiations between Iran and world powers. Last month, Saudi Foreign Minister Saud al-Faisal said Riyadh had invited Zarif, hinting at the possibility of a thaw between the 2 countries. And back here at home, Her Majesty Queen Rania met today with the team members who won the Microsoft Imagine Cup Jordan competition for 2014. Mu'min Namrat and Tariq Benidoumi from the Penn team are students from the Jordan University of Science and Technology and were the overall winners of the Imagine Cup 2014, a global student technology competition. They ranked first in the innovation category and won for developing an application that improves and enhances user experience when drawing and or writing using touch-screen devices. Queen Rania expressed her pride in all Jordanian youth who took part in the competition and wished the Penn team luck in the Arab Semi-Finals Cup to take place in Qatar, where they will compete against participants from 22 Arab countries. Winners of this round will move on to the worldwide final, taking place in July in Seattle, USA. This year, 500 students from different Jordanian universities and schools took part in the competition, 11 of whom reached the final stages and competed in 3 different categories. U.S. President Barack Obama, with the parents of the released Army Sergeant Bowie Bergdahl by his side, said in the White House Rose Garden, the United States has an ironclad commitment to bring home its prisoners of war. Obama thanked the servicemen and diplomats who helped secure the release of Bergdahl. The release comes just days after the U.S. announced plans to withdraw all but nearly 10,000 troops from Afghanistan by the end of the year and the rest by 2016.
I also want to express gratitude to the Afghan government, which has always supported our efforts to secure Bo's release. Going forward, the United States will continue to support an Afghan-led process of reconciliation, which could help secure a hard-earned peace within a sovereign and unified Afghanistan. As I said earlier this week, we're committed to winding down the war in Afghanistan, and we are committed to closing Gitmo. But we also made an ironclad commitment to bring our prisoners of war home. That's who we are as Americans. It's a profound obligation within our military, and today, at least in this instance, it's a promise we've been able to keep.
The lone American prisoner of war, Sergeant Bowie Bergdahl, held in Afghanistan for nearly 5 years, has been flown to a U.S. military hospital in Germany. He was handed to U.S. Special Forces in southeastern Afghanistan as part of a prisoner swap. Bowie was released for 5 Taliban detainees held at Guantanamo Bay. The prisoners would return to their families and live in Qatar, that acted as an intermediary in the negotiations preceding the release. Here's more.
After nearly 5 long years, the dramatic release of U.S. Army Sergeant Bowie Bergdahl happened near here, in the hills of eastern Afghanistan on the Pakistan border. The sole American prisoner of war held in Afghanistan was freed Saturday by U.S. Special Forces in a prisoner swap for 5 Taliban militants held in Guantanamo, Cuba. Once on board an American chopper, Bergdahl wrote a 2-letter question, SF meaning Special Forces? Yes, one of the Special Forces replied. We've been looking for you for a long time. That's when Bergdahl broke down crying. His ordeal was finally over. Bergdahl's freedom suddenly became possible, U.S. officials say, after harder-line factions of the Afghan Taliban shifted course in recent weeks and agreed to back his release. This after years of on-again, off-again talks between the U.S. and the Taliban. U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel speaking to reporters on Sunday.
Our primary focus, I think as you all know, was getting Sergeant Bergdahl back. And we've done that, as I said, as President Obama said, as a result of the help of a lot of people. And so that's our first focus. Whether that could lead to possible new breakthroughs with the Taliban, I don't know. Hopefully it might.
Bergdahl was flown to a U.S. military hospital in Germany. He'll receive treatment there, and then the 28-year-old will be transferred to another military medical facility in Texas.
Meanwhile, Qatari Foreign Minister Khal al praised the efforts of Qatari negotiators who worked to secure the release of the American soldier in exchange for the 5 Taliban detainees. In a joint news conference with visiting German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, he declined to give details about the conditions attached to the prisoner swap, saying Qatar got involved because it was a humanitarian cause. U.S. officials referred to the release of the Taliban detainees as a transfer and noted they would be subject to certain restrictions in Qatar. One official said restrictions would include a minimum 1-year ban on them traveling outside of Qatar, as well as monitoring of their activities.
His Highness the Emir directed the concerned authorities in the state to start this mediation, which succeeded after long negotiations. I have to thank Qatar's negotiating team, who made effort to achieve this result, according to the best traditions, followed by Qatar's policy in humanitarian efforts. In this specific case, it was for a humanitarian cause.
Over to Ukraine, where about 200 people, mostly women and children, gathered on an square in Donetsk to mark an International Children's Day and to demand an end to fighting in the city. The region was the scene of heavy fighting between Ukrainian troops and pro-Russian separatists at the beginning of the week. These separatists cleared barricades and tents outside the regional administration building, which has been under their control for weeks. They said the building will be used by the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic government. Head of the Chinese delegation at a regional security forum convening in Singapore said the provocative, harsh remarks against China by the United States and Japan are not helpful for peace and stability in Asia. Army General Wang Guanzong was delivering a speech on the third day of the Shangri-La dialogue organized by a British-based think tank. He said China's commitment to peaceful development is the largest contribution to the security of Asia. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel had accused China of taking unilateral actions in the South China Sea and said the U.S. will maintain its leadership in the Asia-Pacific and defend the interests of its allies. Here's more.
Senior Chinese General Wang Guanzhong's upset at criticism of his country by Japan and the United States. Speaking at a security summit in Singapore, the Deputy Chief of China's People's Liberation Army went off script to hit back.
Mr. Abe and Mr. Hagel's speech is a form of provocation towards China. One of my foreign friends told me, for Mr. Abe as a Prime Minister and Mr. Hagel as a Secretary of Defense of two big countries, to make such accusations towards China at an event like this is unthinkable. This is totally beyond my expectations.
On Saturday, US Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel warned China to stop destabilizing actions in support of territorial claims.
China has called the South China Sea a sea of peace, friendship, and cooperation. And that's what it should be. But in recent months, China has undertaken destabilizing unilateral actions asserting its claims in the South China Sea.
Hagel also threw his weight behind a push by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for Tokyo to take a more active role in international security. China is locked in territorial disputes with several of its neighbours in the South China Sea. It is also at loggerheads with Japan over a string of islands in the East China Sea.
FIFA's decision to award the 2022 World Cup to Qatar has come under fresh scrutiny after a British newspaper printed claims of corruption over the bid. The Sunday Times said it has obtained millions of documents which allegedly show that Qatari ex-FIFA executive member Mohammed bin Hammam paid FIFA officials in the region $5 million for their support of the Qatar bid. Football Association Chairman Greg Dyke has called for a full investigation into the claims of corruption and to take the the allegations seriously. Vice President of FIFA said he would be in favor of rerunning the vote for the host nation if the allegations could be proved. 4 years ago, Qatar beat competition from Australia, Japan, South Korea and the United States to become the first Arab state to host a tournament in 2022. The decision to give the World Cup to Qatar was seen as surprising by many, including Dyke.
I think it's always been surprising that, and a lot of people in football I think were surprised that the 22 World Cup went to Qatar. I mean, you know, it's a fairly small country with no real footballing tradition. And of course, for a summer tournament, impossible to play there because it's too hot. So I think many people were surprised when it went there. So I don't think they'll be surprised that perhaps there are suggestions that it wasn't all above board. Well, I think they are very serious allegations and they clearly need to be fully investigated by FIFA. Now there's a guy called Michael Garcia who is doing an investigation already, an independent lawyer from New York who's doing an investigation into what happened in the bidding for the 2022 World Cup. So clearly he should take on board all this evidence that is in today's Sunday Times.
11 days until this year's World Cup, and in Germany, soccer fans are preparing to make themselves comfortable by moving their sofas from home to a local Berlin stadium. Fans and supporters arrived at Berlin's 1FC club with couches on the shoulders, on trolleys and on trucks to settle in what is dubbed the World Cup living room. Organizers of the World Cup living room are hoping that some 800 couches will be set up, making it the largest ever apartment sharing community with more than 3,000 residents and another 10,000 viewers on the stands. Germany began their World Cup campaign against Portugal on June 16. And finally, fair weather tonight with partly cloudy skies and northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, moderate weather continues as temperatures will remain 4 to 5 degrees below their seasonal average. Low altitude clouds are also expected, while winds will be northwesterly moderate to brisk. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect moderate conditions tonight, but hot tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and calm seas. You now look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. The Israeli Prime Minister warns against any international rush to recognize the Palestinian government due to be announced under a unity pact between Fatah and Hamas groups. 2 Jordanian students from the University of Science and Technology, winners of the Microsoft Imagine Cup Jordan, meet with Her Majesty Queen Rania as they prepare to take part in the Arab Semi-Finals Cup in Qatar. And FIFA is facing calls to rerun the bidding competition for the 2022 World Cup after allegations that the Qatar bid was corrupt. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Arif Khan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.